Okay, well, once again, I want to thank all of you for being here in tonight's session. And let's talk about some of the things that are affecting air conditioning service right now moving forward. You know, in some respects, it seems kind of crazy that with respect to Section 609, that's really been a law since January 1 of 1992 that you have to have a Section 609 credential for motor vehicle air conditioning system. And even though that law has been in place for a long time via the EPA, there's still people that don't know that you have to have this credential or sometimes get another credential, either from another organization or even from within ASE. They get these things confused. So tonight I've divided the presentation up as best I could into really four sections, and they're a little bit interrelated. And I want to talk just a little bit about some developments related to the realities of refrigerant. You probably see some things in the news, or you hear some people talking in your shop or school or whatever environment that you happen to be in. There are some some myths on the street. There's been some industry infighting, governmental fighting, and some other things that have created some misperceptions. And I'm not going to be a regulatory expert. I'm not a legal expert on all of the things related to it, but I know some of the issues related to at least addressing our program, so I'll do the best that I can with those. I'm also not a chemist, so I don't work for DuPont or Honeywell or any of the others. And I just try to deal with this thing from the practical aspects of what you folks out there need to do when you're working, again, on a motor vehicle air conditioning system. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about EPA rule actions. That's kind of important because the EPA actions, basically have outcomes in terms of what you do when you're in a service environment, or whether you're at the school, and these sorts of things, as far as what's considered, the right practices or even legal practices for that matter when working on a motor vehicle air conditioning system, or what we can just call an MVAC. Okay. Of course, all these things have an impact on Section 609 going forward, because the heart of that whole program is environmental protection and refrigerant management. So every time there's a change in one of those, it has to have a carry through and come out somewhere down the line in terms of what it is that you do. And then I'm just going to mention a little bit about the program changes as a result of all these industry things. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about R1234YF in terms of some of the current status of things. And R1234YF, there you hear things out there that it's horribly flammable, or you hear this or you hear that. It is a mildly flammable refrigerant, and there was some controversy over that early on, but its use is now taking off. In fact, this year it's really going to skyrocket. It continues to be expensive. The Fiat Chrysler of America list price right now is $10.25 an ounce, which really calculates out to, I think, $1,600 for a 10-pound cylinder. Now, right now there are two plants operating that produce the stuff. There's one that's under license in Japan. There is one in China, and a third one just came online as of last week that's going to be producing it in India. There's been some rumors of others, but I'm not going to spread rumors. And, that's for the folks in the big towers to figure all that kind of stuff. But that much I can tell you is there's really two operating, a third coming online later this year. The one thing I'm going to ask you to do is to just continue to monitor this situation, through webinars like this or other industry trade journals or wherever else you get reliable information from. Because when I say $10.25 an ounce, I don't really mean that to spawn pricing panic. I don't want people freaking out and going crazy about it. It's just that you have to realize that this is still in the infancy of the rollout of 1234. It's had good initial success, but again, it's new. The capacity of these plants is not totally up to what it will need to be long term. The production of cars will continue to increase, as will the production of 1234. So we're kind of on a sliding scale here a little bit. So again, just watch what's going on and don't panic about the price. And to a little bit comment as an aside a little bit to this about pricing panic, I want to just say, the systems nowadays compared to back, say, like in the 80s when you had systems that leaked everywhere, the integrity of these systems is incredible as far as how leak-proof they are. I don't want to say they're absolutely leak-proof, okay, but the leakage from these systems is really very, very minimal. They've gone to flange-style gaskets, better materials. The evaporator in a 1234 system has to meet a new SAE standard J2842. So there's a whole bunch of things that they've done to increase the integrity of these systems. And when I talk about that, as well as with pricing, the whole idea of topping off a system is something that is steeped in the mind of still many technicians that have been around for a while. And certainly it's steeped in the mind of motorists, which doesn't help our cause much as we're going forward with working on these systems. Because during the old days, I mean, that's how you fixed the system that wasn't cooling properly, right? You always threw refrigerant in it. Well, I submit to you that that has totally changed. The methodology now, when there's an air conditioning problem, it may not be refrigerant related at all. There could be a control system problem, electrical, things of that nature as far as why it's not cooling. Okay, so right now, 1234YF comes packaged in a 10-pound cylinder, but there's nothing that says that 1234 can't come in a 30-pound cylinder eventually, or another packaging, consideration. But right now, because of the cost, 10 pounds of it is plenty. And also, you'll see that on the screen, I've got a system label. It's from a Jeep Cherokee. And you can see that even though this is a larger vehicle, it's holding just over 1 pound. This isn't like the old days of having, 3 pounds or so of refrigerant. And so it goes back to the topping off issue, is that there isn't really a whole lot of refrigerant in these systems to begin with. So the amount you put in them is minimal. The margin of error for getting the charge wrong is virtually nil. So it's really become, in terms of refrigerant charging, it's become much more of a precision effort than is done in the past. And one last comment is that again, the 1234 cylinders that you see are white and red, and it doesn't matter. You can have a red band with a white body, or a white body with a red handle. So those are the two packaging alternatives that they're currently using. So right now, as far as across the world, we have over 8 million cars using 1234YF. And almost all US cars are going to have 1234YF refrigerant by model year 2017. With the rollout the way that the car manufacturers are doing it now, and I don't have a chart to share with you tonight because it's changing almost by the moment, but a lot of them are really ramping it up now. Again, 2017, we'll see a lot of this done. Chrysler has been ahead of most people with it because of the greenhouse gas issues in terms of getting that for CAFE credits. And so they've got more models than anybody else, but of course the 2013 Cadillac XTS was the first to lead the charge with it, but we'll be seeing it coming out everywhere. And cars in the US will no longer have R134A by model year 2021. That's now a law, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. All right, now we're going to switch gears into another refrigerant that's kind of been at the heart of some controversy, and that is carbon dioxide, or R744. In September of 2012, Daimler was using, through its Mercedes products, was putting R1234YF into some of its vehicles. And there was an accident in Europe, or during some testing, that they were doing on a test rig, and they claimed that this refrigerant was flammable, and they were very, very concerned. So the cars that they had out on the road at that time, they were going to change them back to using 134A at that time because they were concerned about the interest of their customers. They issued a press release on that note, and then also said that they were going to march ahead and use carbon dioxide as the next refrigerant instead of going the 1234YF route. So there's been a lot of activity that's been going on about it, and finally now Daimler has said that the S and E class models for 2017 are going to be using CO2, and the remainder of them are going to be using 1234YF. So they've gone back to that. But what they're doing is, in their view, they're equipping models with where the hot points are in the underhood area. They're using argon fire suppression to address that. And of course, the big question is whether CO2 cars are coming here or not. I just want to remind everyone that carbon dioxide is an accepted alternative refrigerant through the US EPA. We do cover it in our Section 609 materials. We were required to cover it. So the refrigerant itself is accepted, but there isn't any service equipment here yet or standards activity here yet in the US as far as addressing those systems. Again, this is very, very premature. This is a development that's occurring. And that's really the latest that I have on this particular topic. But again, continue to monitor this as we move ahead. So now we're going to switch gears into regulations for just a little bit. I'm going to talk about the final SNAP rule. SNAP is EPA lingo for the Significant New Alternatives Policy. And that goes all the way back to the R12 days when we moved away from R12 and EPA began listing refrigerants as either acceptable with use conditions or non-acceptable. And with use conditions means that it provided it's this way, it may only be accepted for a new application, it may only be acceptable for a retrofit application or both, and it's all in the charts that they provide. So on July 20th, there was a proposed SNAP rule that eventually changed gears into a final rule, meaning it was ratified and put into law, changed the listing status of certain high global warming potential chemicals. Okay, and these were previously okay under the old SNAP listings. Okay, and I've got the URL there. That's also in the resources that are included in the handout section. So instead of getting into all the law doublespeak and gobbledygook, let's just talk about what it means to you. So it means that 134A is no longer an acceptable alternative refrigerant as of model year 2021. You will not see it in cars in the United States anymore as of that year. Okay. There is a narrow use exception through model year 2025, and what narrow use is basically it's cars that are going to other countries other than Europe, such as those with developing economies and that, where it's still okay to use 134, but in the US, that's it. 2021 is the cut point. And that means that the car manufacturers have to use something other than, and even though right now 1234YF is the heir apparent for what's going in systems and the manufacturers are embracing it, it doesn't mean that they still couldn't use something else. And I already mentioned the CO2 that Daimler's working with. So all of this is, there's no sense in panicking about it, because really what we're talking about here is a phase down, not a phase out. So when they stop making cars with 134A as the OE refrigerant, it doesn't mean that 134A won't be around as a service refrigerant. It'll be around to service those cars made out through those years. So it'll be around for some time to come. So there's a large part of air conditioning service that really isn't going to change. Okay, we're going through a transition right now. We're moving in that way. But one of the interesting things is about this now that this is a law that a car can't have 134 in it anymore, is that initially the car makers switched to 1234 using kind of a carrot mentality of getting incentives, fuel economy incentives, as they certified their cars. Well, now there's a hard law put into place, so they'll have to switch to something, again, other than 134A. There are also some other previously accepted alternatives. I won't get into all of those. They're in a chart that EPA provides that are unacceptable as of model year 2017. And a lot of those are service refrigerants and things that you may or may not touch at all or rarely touch. And those are all covered in a chart by EPA. Now, this is an important thing I want everyone to be aware of when we're going to be talking about servicing vehicles, and the question of retrofit as we switch gears from 134 to 1234 comes up. So I want to make it perfectly clear to everybody that, first of all, you can't put 134A in a 1234 system, and you can't put 1234 in a 134A system. And what's mostly important about this particular slide is that if you play with the refrigerant in a 1234 system, not only are you doing something illegal on the refrigerant side, you are also tampering with that vehicle's emissions compliance. If you read that last sentence that's highlighted here, and I won't read all of it to you, that's for sure, but basically they say it's considered tampering with an emissions-related component under Title II of the Clean Air Act amendments. So, things be getting complicated. I want everyone to know that this is an important consideration if somebody talks about some magic fittings of doing this and doing that. And I'm not saying things like that won't happen out there in the real world, but this is the real world here as far as what it means to the vehicle. Okay, another EPA action is the proposed rule, and that it was on November 9th of 2015, where EPA put out a proposed rule that extends the sales restriction currently in place for ozone-depleting substances, R12, okay, to HFCs like HFC 134A, or as we all lovingly know it as R134A. This is expected to become a final rule later this year. And again, this link is in the handouts. Well, what it means to you is that it's going to require a Section 609 credential to purchase R134A, just like, when you were buying 12. So that sales restriction is now in place on the large cylinders. So you'll need to keep your credentials accessible for refrigerant purchases. And it's going to require record keeping of transactions for refrigerant sellers and distributors, as far as who they're selling refrigerant to. So we're kind of going retro in terms of this process of what used to be done in the past. So there is a bit of an exception to this rule, and there's an exception for containers of 2 pounds or less that have a self-sealing can like they were using in California. That's the way the law is written. So this is going to really impact your larger cylinders as far as this new sales restriction that's pending. So let's quickly talk about 609 or 608 applications. Under the law, there's 609 is a motor vehicle air conditioning application. Section 608 is usually a stationary application. And that's divided really into 4 different types under 608. And we get a lot of these types of questions, but visually here, the vehicles that you see on the screen, this is straight from EPA as far as the applicability of 609 versus 608. So you'll see like your MVAC appliances where you've got like ag equipment, construction equipment. Over-the-road trucks are also covered under 609 yet. Buses have an exception if there's R22 in them. It would depend on the type of system. But most of the light-duty vehicles that you're working on are going to be Section 609 applications. Okay, under our umbrella at ASE, we do credentialing in many areas, of course. And one of our exams that we have similar ones as well, is we have the ASE Heating and Air Conditioning System Certification, A7. There's also T7, H7, and S7, which is school bus, but those are under transit and some of the other categories. Those are not an equivalent to a Section 609 credential like ASE has with its program. I want to make that distinction very, very clear, because I can't tell you how many times I've been on the phone with technicians that have had the A7, they're currently certified in it, and they assume that they were covered under federal law with having that A7, T7, S7, or H7 credential. And I've said, no, you're not covered at all. I mean, if you were to be audited by EPA and they came in and checked your facility, then you wouldn't have the proper credentials. So it's a simple thing, but I can't reinforce this enough, stress it enough as far as the importance of it and the relevance of it. So as far as the changes to our current program, they're really on the light side, because we made a major revision in 2015 to the program. And that's where we included discussion of 1234A in many capacities, CO2 or R744, and we also cover refrigerant R152A, which is also an accepted refrigerant by EPA. We got into a lot more intense coverage on those, and many different facets, increased the content of the book significantly. So that was our big revision. And then both the final and the proposed rule that I've talked about tonight in some detail already, that's covered in the book, because again, we're required by law to cover those things. And we will be covering, in a future edition, we will be covering the November 9th, 2015 proposed rule as a final rule when it becomes a final rule. I don't know when that date's going to be. I was advised by EPA that it will be later, sometime in 2016. So that's the best I can tell you at this point. And then also we updated the refrigerant status chart. Okay, as far as the program availability for the ASE Section 609 program, most convenient way to do it is it's available online at our ASE Campus e-learning portal. And you can get instant credentials online, where what we do is we issue you a 60-day temporary credential, And in that interim period, we mail to you a wallet card and a certificate. Also, one of the features we have is we have a voucher program, which is essentially electronic coupons, which is really helpful for schools and employers that are buying credits for people at a time. And they can keep track of those and issue them out to their employees or students as they see fit. It works really well for that. We also have still the printed booklet. You can request it at the ase.com/CFC URL, and we'll send one of those out to you. And the cost is $19 per candidate, and that's whether it's paper or online. So that's the guts of what I really had tonight. And at this point, I would like to take some questions. If Dan and Don seeing anything trending?
And Dave, we had a couple of questions about their old credentials. So far, EPA doesn't require an expiration on their old credentials, do they? But we would recommend that they still take this test to get updated with the information. But has EPA grandfathered that in, or have they put in a recert requirement yet?
There's not a recert requirement yet, but that is pending, and I would expect some activity in that, in the not too distant future. There's a lot of activity in industry about that. But as of this present moment, the older credential is it still legally covers you. However, just realize that when you took that, that was a completely different program. We've issued significantly new, updated, ongoing content to our program ever since we first began.
So Dave, for those of the attendees that are asking, is there any, if their credentials are still good, the answer is yes, correct?
Legally, yes. But in a sense, kind of ethically, you could make the argument no, because they don't cover anything in an older program about 1234 or any of the other newer things that are going on. So, again, we've added a lot of content to the program over the years. Okay, one of the comments that we got, or questions we got, is what is happening in the ag and off-road construction equipment? And I'm taking that as a question with respect to, are they moving towards 1234 refrigerant, any other newer refrigerants? Those markets have not yet been approved by EPA. There's activity going on in that regard right now as far as them, possibly using a different refrigerant, but there's nothing legally yet in place for them to start making that transition. And 1234YF, is it a blend or a single component refrigerant? It's a single component refrigerant. It is not a blend, so you're not going to get fractionation issues when you service it. So that's a good thing. We often get the trivial question of what does the YF stand for? All I can tell you is that it is to signify the molecular distinction between variants of a similar chemical structure. Yeah, that's all I can tell you.
Dan, my understanding is that there is no restriction for purchasing this the 1234YF by consumers if in the small containers. That's what you were saying in your presentation. Is that understanding correct?
Well, I was really addressing it right now towards 134. Okay. Right now, there's no sales restriction on 134. Okay. At all. So as this sales restriction goes into place and moves from a proposed rule to a final rule later this year, then there will be a sales restriction put in place. There is an exception in the rule for the 2-pound cylinders with a self-sealing valve, as I pointed out before, that they used in California. I think are still using in California. I think there they have a deposit, though.
And you may have already said this, but this presentation is going to be available online at ase.com, isn't it, Dave?
Actually, more pointedly, and thanks for bringing that up, Don, what we do is every one of these webinars, we record them, and then what we do is we post them up to YouTube on the ASE Campus YouTube channel. So if you just punch in ASE Campus when you go to YouTube, then you can subscribe to it, and you'll be notified of any new uploads that come into that channel. And I encourage you to do so because, we think that some of the stuff is pretty important to keep you guys informed.
Dave, just to be clear, if I'm working and I have a shop foreman that has Section 609 credentialing, am I allowed as the supervised staff member to work on those mobile air conditioning systems?
Anybody that touches a motor vehicle air conditioning system, for hire needs to have a 609 credential. What else we got going on out there?
Dave, here's an interesting question regarding if one of the 1234YF containers does start to leak, right? Is there any special handling or considerations of that if one of those tanks does leak a valve or something? Are you familiar with any of that?
Not aware of any special handling for it. I mean, certainly you don't want that to happen. I mean, I would address it if you found that you had a cylinder that's leaking. You want to address it with your distributor, who you got it from right away. I mean, again, with that kind of pricing, having it leak is going to get costly in a hurry. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think the question of flammability is still an open question. I don't know that we really know what the parameters are. You may, but I think that was really where they were headed for the hazardous aspect of it. Or
well, the flammability was an issue. That was a pushback issue, and again, that came from some things overseas that were going on. I personally have seen 1234 held up under pressure to a torch, and it will only burn if you force the torch into it. It does not keep going. And if you really want to put this into context, think about all the flammable type of fluids that are on a vehicle. I mean, what about gasoline? What about power steering fluid, transmission fluid, these sorts of things? So let's be fair about it. And again, I'm not an advocate for 1234 in terms of all that kind of stuff, but some of this has been blown up way out of proportion. And again, I want to be clear about one point. You can't put 134 in a 1234 system, and you can't put 1234 in a 134 system. The pressure temperature relationships of both of these refrigerants are almost identical. That's one of the reasons that they've gone with it, is it required less system changes, any major changes, where if you're going to be going to CO2, CO2 is going to be working at roughly 10 times the pressure. That's a pretty significant change. One of the service considerations I want to mention real quick, and I didn't have that in the slides, but this is one thing that I want to mention. Obviously, probably most of the audience, I know I'm making a little bit of an assumption, most of the audience has not touched a 1234 system. A J2843 compliant piece of equipment that equipment has to meet in order to service 1234 systems, okay, it does a very, very thorough leak check and a pressure check and a vacuum decay check. It takes longer to service a system now with one of these machines than it's taken in the past from what you're used to. And some people are complaining about that, saying that, well, we got to be able to do the turnaround faster. But in order to do it thorough and charge a refrigerant that costs as much as it does and ensure there are no leaks, make sure that the refrigerant is pure in that system, these are the types of checks. This is where air conditioning service is going. So I would say, adjust your workflows accordingly best you can as these systems, begin to become popular. What else we got out there, Don and Dan?
Dave, is there any requirement is the Section 609 requirement apply to students working on air conditioning systems in class under the instructor's direction if they're handling the systems? Do you know?
Well, we could split hairs on that one, and I would say, well, if it's a student, they're not doing it for hire. But I personally, I'm not going to make that recommendation and say, no, that wouldn't apply to you. I would recommend anybody in a gray area to get the credential. Certainly the instructors would have to have it because they are doing it for hire. Yeah, we're getting a little bit of commentary too. Somebody's talking about the hydrogen fluoride gas from 1234. I've heard that argument as well. I don't want to get into a big political discussion about what's happened in the European Union, but a lot of the controversy regarding 1234 YF has come out of the European Union because there's been some political moves one way or the other with its feasibility or not, and being beholden to just one manufacturer of refrigerant when there's limited quantities. And I think there's a lot of very interesting arguments in that. And I can't take sides to those arguments. Again, I can only tell you what I know. But there have been numerous SAE, Cooperative Research Council, CRC research panels with constituents from all the various car makers that basically said that 1234 is a go. And then when there was the big pushback, they went and they did another one, and there seems to be no issues with it as far as that consortium goes. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. We'll have to wait and see what happens with CO2, going forward. Now, somebody asked the question, what if you put CO2 in a 1234 134 system? Well, it's not going to do anything because it's not going to create enough pressure. You got to have 10 times as much. The other thing is everyone should know that really since the beginning of air conditioning systems, going all the way back to R12, okay, we've had distinct service fittings with the intent of preventing cross-contamination from systems and putting the wrong refrigerant in there, contaminating your recovery recycling machine or all your other, various things that you use to work on AC systems. So realize that each one of these systems under federal law has to have unique service fittings with a label that identifies that, the refrigerant, the fittings, system charge amount, things of that nature. Yeah, and again, I'm going to reinforce the point that there won't be any retrofit of older 12 or 134 ASE systems because the 134 refrigerant will be around for some time to come, even after 134 cars are not going to be made. So this is different than the transition from 12 to 134. So you're getting questions about CO2 availability stateside. Don't know any of that right now because we don't even know if these cars are going to make it to this shore, okay? I have heard nothing. I mean, there was some stuff that came out of the European journals that Volkswagen had agreed that they were going to use it on 2 models. They were going to use it on the Phaeton, the new Phaeton, and the A8, the Audi A8, but I haven't heard anything about that. Let's talk about service equipment for a second. Is there refrigerant identifiers for 1234YF? Absolutely there is. If you look at our Section 609 program, we cover that in detail. We tell you which SAE-J standards apply to using it on a 1234 system, a 134 system, so on and so forth. And lubricants, those are, depending on the application, again, check with the manufacturer. There's really nothing outlandishly different than that. In fact, you'll see on some of the compressors that are out there, we'll have a tag on them that they're compliant with both 134 and 1234. The big difference again in a 1234 system is the evaporator. The evaporator is more robust. They become less of a leak point because since this refrigerant is classified as mildly flammable, SAE was charged with coming up with a standard that would, make sure that whoever's making these evaporators steps up to the plate and meets those new specs. What else you guys see?
Dave, the recapture equipment for 1234YF, will that be similar to the recycling equipment that we use now in terms of capability?
Yeah, it's going to be similar, but it's going to also have some differences because of the fact that it has to do a refrigerant identification check, and then it does a vacuum decay and a pressure check before it charges the system. So a recovery recycling machine that meets J2843 is required to have either an integral refrigerant identifier or an external one, but it's got to have one or the other. The external one connects via a USB connector. but it's got to have it. It's part of the whole thing, the thoroughness of servicing a 1234 system. The other thing I want to mention too is, if you know, it's probably too early for you to maybe be looking at 1234 equipment, depending on, you know, what kind of environment you work in. Maybe some of you are looking at equipment, but the equipment that's out there isn't just one way or the other. There is an SAE standard that's it's called J3030, which talks about machines that'll service both refrigerants, 134 and 1234. So that might be something to look at. I am also going to, if you'll bear with me just a second, I'm going to show you something to look at here real quick, to look up some equipment and training and things of that nature. Okay, this is a resource that many people aren't aware of, and so we'd like to spread the word on this. But if you do a search and you can look up, you know, by equipment name, model ID, UC, I don't need to read it all to you. But this is a great resource to find things for mobile air conditioning service to do the job right, to make the right choices. And I encourage you to research this and go through, use the various filters. You know, look up equipment that's out there so you can make sure that it meets the EPA requirements and the associated SAE standards. And here's the URL for that. Here's the URL for the ASE program, or section 609. Again, if the question comes up, how do I get this thing? The most convenient way is to go online, take the program there, you get instant results. As far as applicability of vehicles, you're going to see, again, a lot of vehicles start to use it. Chrysler's using, again, 1234YF the most. I've heard that GM and Ford within the next year and a half or so are going to be rolling it out in almost all their models. You'll see it almost everywhere, because now it's going to really hit the adoption rate of everybody, you know, getting into place. And again, I'm focusing on U.S. models here. In Europe, I mean, they're making they have to do it by January 1 of 2017. They have to be compliant with the European Commission mandate over there. Here we're on a little bit of a different cycle.
Dave, in the heavy duty and transit arena, do you know, for those 609 compliant vehicles, is the ramp in time for the OEs similar to the light duty side? Are they under the same guidelines for replacement? Do you know?
You mean in terms of end of production where they can't use 134 anymore? Is that what you mean?
Yes, I think that's what the guys are asking about.
Nothing's in place yet, because 1234 has not yet been approved for use in the heavy duty market. I expect it's going to happen real soon. There's activity going on that right at this moment. But again, that's one of the things, you know, we just keep watching this information, and we'll do our best to share some of those developments. We get that all the time because of our heavy duty vehicle series that we have. So when that changes, we'll certainly make that known. Any other trends happening, Dan and Don? Got some really good questions tonight. I appreciate this. I appreciate everybody sticking with us to go through these.
Are any of the Asian manufacturers coming on board with the 1234YF yet, Dave?
Yes. You know, incrementally adding it, and then it's going to take off, because they're eventually going to work. You know, they got the mandate now in place, but again, they can they'll also qualify for the greenhouse gas credits and CAFE credits by using it. Leak checking on these systems is similar to what you've been doing with 134. I mean, there's nothing earth-shattering there. It's just that there's equipment that's compliant with this refrigerant, and there's associated standards with it. Again, if you go to our program, our Section 609 program, whether you're online or whether you do the printed version, the content is the same. We do cover that as far as the appropriate standards. And also the online database that I showed you, you can find some of that in there. All right, I'll take just a couple more, and then I think we're going to wrap it up here. Dan, you got anything your way? I'm kind of going through them myself here.
Just confirm the two things. What's the timeline for the manufacturers for their transition? Okay.
Okay, so for light duty vehicles, manufacturers can no longer use R134A as of the 2021 model year. They must use something else. By all indications, it looks like 1234YF is going to be it, but that doesn't mean that it has to be exclusively 1234YF.
And the next is just a statement for the folks that were asking if the Asian cars were using it. Many dealership technicians from the Asian market have chimed in, Toyota, Honda, Kia, stating that they already have vehicles that are using that system, and equipment has been, or that chemical and equipment has been delivered to their dealerships to allow them to perform the services required on those as needed. And then the last thing, Dave, is again, if a technician needs a Section 609, they don't have it yet, okay, I've never received it, and they want to get one, how do they do it again?
I'm going to back up my slides and I'll show you. The easiest way, quickest way, most convenient way is to go online to asecampus.com, where our learning management system is. You can get instant credentials there. You get to work through a virtual book, which is the same exact one as the printed booklet, only that it's in digital format. So you take the quiz online, and provided you're successful, then you will be able to print out a temporary certificate good for 60 days. And in that interim period, we will mail you one from our headquarters, which will include the wallet card and a certificate. Also, we have a voucher program, which is great for employers and schools. If you have multiple people that need to take it, you can make a single purchase and distribute these electronic codes, which they then redeem when they go and purchase the program. And again, we have the printed booklet. You can request that at ase.com/CFC. And also it's sprinkled throughout the website as well, and other places. If you go to tests, you'll find the refrigerant recovery program listed there. So it's kind of hard not to find it. So we try to make it as obvious as possible, but it's $19 per candidate, and that's true of whether you do it online or whether you do it on paper pencil. Only thing with paper pencil, it takes a while to turn it around because you got the mailing aspects of it of sending it in. We don't accept fax forms because from a fax, we can't tell if it's got original marks on the question form or not. Well, just a reminder, ASE certification testing is underway through May 25th. Once you register, you have 90 days to schedule a testing appointment, and testing is now continuously available throughout the year. So that's a great feature we'd like to make known to everybody if you're not yet aware. And I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight and for your excellent questions and attendance. And again, we hope to see you at a ASE webinar again soon. And on behalf of Dan Baumhart and Don Du, I am Dave Kappert, and we'll see you soon. Thanks again, everyone.